Welcome to our deep dive into the United States.
Oh, this is going to be a good one.
Yeah, right. I mean, it's such a fascinating country, right? It's so much to explore.
Yeah, and we're starting with its Wikipedia article, which I know might sound basic,
Yeah,
but it's actually a great resource, gives us a solid overview.
it does. It does. And I think
Right.
what we're going to try to do today is like really dig into that,
Yeah.
get beyond just the surface level facts.
Exactly. Find those hidden gems.
Yeah, those hidden gems and like connect the dots, right? See how all these different pieces fit together.
Because the U.S. is such a complex nation.
Oh,
Its
absolutely.
history, its people, its global influence, it's
Yeah.
a lot to unpack.
Yeah, so much to unpack. Okay, so let's rewind the clock way back, like over 12,000 years ago.
Oh, wow.
Right, to the migration of Paleo-Indians across the Bering Land Bridge. I mean, imagine those first footprints, marking the very beginning of human presence in what we now call the USA. It's pretty mind-blowing.
It really is.
Right.
And what's fascinating is that there's some evidence suggesting humans may have arrived even earlier.
No, really?
Yeah, by boat along the Pacific coast. It kind of challenges the traditional narrative.
Huh, I never knew that. See, this is what I love about these deep dives. Always something new to learn.
Always.
Okay, so fast forwarding a bit, we can't talk about U.S. history without talking about the arrival of European colonists.
Right. A major turning point.
Yeah, 1607, Jamestown, Virginia, the first permanent English settlement. That really set things in motion.
It did. And unfortunately set in motion a very dark chapter, too. The forced migration of enslaved Africans.
Yeah, absolutely. A legacy that still shapes American society today.
It's a stark reminder that the path to becoming a nation, it's rarely smooth or simple.
For sure. And then there's the American Revolution. So much more than just taxes, right?
Exactly. It was about representation, autonomy, those core American values of liberty and self-determination.
And speaking of core values, that Declaration of Independence in 1776, wow.
Yeah, talk about a powerful document.
Right. Those ideas resonated far beyond the 13 colonies.
It inspired movements all over the world.
It's incredible. And yet, even as the U.S. was championing these ideals of liberty,
There's another side to that story.
there is. Westward expansion came at a huge cost to Native American populations.
A tragic cost.
It really makes you question the whole idea of manifest destiny.
Mhm.
That belief that westward expansion was both justified and inevitable. And then, of course, there's the issue of slavery. That led to the most defining conflict in American history,
The Civil War.
a brutal and bloody conflict.
It really exposed the deep divisions within the nation.
And you know what's crazy? Even after the Union won, even after slavery was abolished,
Yeah,
the fight for true equality and civil rights went on for generations.
it did. It shows just how deeply rooted those social and cultural prejudices were.
Absolutely. And it makes you think about the long and often difficult road to progress.
Right. One step forward, sometimes two steps back. But, despite these challenges, the U.S. continued to grow and change.
Yeah, like in the late 19th and early 20th centuries, there was this massive wave of immigration, mostly from Europe.
Transforming American cities and culture.
Yeah, it wasn't just numbers. It was this incredible fusion of traditions and languages and perspectives, shaping the American identity we know today.
Right, a melting pot of cultures.
And alongside that, there was this period of like crazy industrialization and technological advancement. Railroads, oil, steel, the automobile.
It was a time of immense innovation, reshaping not just the economy, but society as a whole.
But of course, with rapid growth comes challenges.
Uh-huh.
Definitely rising inequality, labor unrest, the gap between the haves and have-nots,
It led to the rise of labor unions.
and demands for social reforms, right, setting the stage for the progressive era.
Exactly.
Okay, now let's talk World Wars. World War I was a turning point for the U.S.
It really shattered that long-held policy of isolationism.
And then World War II, well, that just changed everything. It's chilling to think about, but this is when the U.S. developed the first nuclear weapons,
Yeah.
leading to Hiroshima and Nagasaki.
Events that forever altered the course of human history.
They did. And after the war, the U.S. emerged as a global superpower.
Alongside the Soviet Union.
Right. And that set the stage for the Cold War.
Decades of tension and rivalry.
The threat of nuclear annihilation hanging over everything.
A truly defining era, not just for the U.S., but for the entire world.
Okay, so we left off talking about the Cold War, all that tension with the Soviet Union. It's kind of wild to think about how much the world changed after it ended.
It really is.
Yeah.
But, even without that global standoff, the U.S. has faced, and It still faces some serious internal challenges.
Right, right.
I mean, we talked about its economic power, its global leadership role,
Hmm.
but it's also dealing with poverty, inequality, and, a lack of those social safety nets you see in a lot of other developed countries.
Yeah, it's like this paradox almost, the land of opportunity, but also these stark contrasts.
Absolutely. Like healthcare. The
Mhm.
U.S. spends a ton on healthcare, more than anyone else, but millions of Americans don't even have health insurance.
It's crazy. It's like the system itself is creating these disparities.
Well, it's a complicated issue. It's tied up with American beliefs about individual responsibility, the
Mm.
role of the government, even the definition of freedom.
Right, right. Some people think healthcare is a right, others see it as a commodity.
Exactly. And that debate just keeps going on and on.
Yeah, but it's not just a theoretical debate, right? It has real consequences for people.
Absolutely. And it makes you think about the American dream, too. That idea that anyone can achieve success through hard work. Is that still true for everyone?
Yeah, is it becoming more of a myth, with rising costs and stagnant wages and the middle class shrinking?
Well, the data shows that social mobility has actually declined in recent decades.
Oh, wow.
It's harder for people to climb that economic ladder now than it was for their parents.
So it's not as simple as pulling yourself up by your bootstraps anymore, that whole idea.
It's just not that simple. Things like race, your background, even where you live, they all play a role.
And that's going to be frustrating for a lot of people.
It is. It's led to a lot of disillusionment, especially among younger Americans who are
And
struggling.
you see that playing out in politics, right?
Absolutely. The
Huh.
rise of populism, both on the left and the right.
People feeling like the system isn't working for them.
Right. That the American dream is facing some harsh realities.
Yeah. The gap between the rich and the poor is getting wider.
And the middle class, which used to be so strong, is feeling squeezed.
It's a lot to process. Okay, let's switch gears for a minute and talk about education. That's supposed to be the great equalizer, right?
It is, in theory, but the reality is more complicated.
Yeah. I mean, we hear about these amazing universities like Harvard and Stanford, but what about the rest of the system?
Well, the U.S. spends a lot on education, more than most countries,
Okay.
but the outcomes are pretty uneven. Quality really depends on where you live, what resources are available.
So not every American kid has access to a good education.
Sadly, no. And that has long-term consequences, not just for individuals, but for society as a whole.
Right, right. It contributes to that cycle of poverty and inequality we were talking about.
Exactly. Limits social mobility, hinders economic growth.
So a child's zip code affects their healthcare and their education.
Pretty much, yeah.
Wow. And what about college?
Public universities and community colleges are vital. They make higher education accessible to millions.
Okay.
But even they're facing challenges. Rising tuition costs, shrinking state funding.
And then there's the whole student loan debt crisis.
Yeah, that's a huge burden for a lot of young people.
It makes you wonder if college is even worth it anymore.
Well, the economic landscape is changing. The old markers of success aren't so clear-cut anymore.
It's like that whole path, college, good job, house, family. Is it even realistic these days?
It's definitely tougher, but, amidst all these challenges, there's also a lot of innovation.
Oh, yeah?
Young people are finding new ways to build fulfilling lives. They're challenging the status quo.
So there's hope then.
Absolutely. That American spirit of resilience is alive and well.
I love that. Okay, let's lighten things up a bit. What about American culture? It's everywhere, right?
It is Hollywood movies, American music, fast food.
McDonald's, Starbucks. They're global.
They are. For better or worse, they've become symbols of globalization.
And then there are brands like Coca-Cola, Levi's, Nike.
It's like they embody this idea of freedom, individuality, the pursuit of happiness.
Right, but American culture is so much more than that, right?
Of course. Don't forget, the U.S. is a nation of immigrants. It's incredibly diverse.
Yeah, that diversity is reflected in everything: food, music, literature, art.
And don't underestimate the impact of technology, the internet, social media.
It's constantly evolving, right?
It is a blend of tradition and innovation, conformity and rebellion.
It's like the U.S. is always reinventing itself, trying to find that balance between its history and the future. We've covered so much ground, but what else is there to explore?
Well, we've barely touched on the U.S. political system, its relationship with race and identity, its role in global affairs. There's so much more to uncover.
Okay, I'm hooked. Lead the way.
All right, let's dive into the heart of American governance, the political system. It's this fascinating blend of history, democratic ideals, and a little bit of, let's face it, pragmatic compromise.
It sounds kind of like a balancing act.
It is, in many ways. One thing that makes it unique is its structure as a federal republic.
Okay, break that down for me.
So you have power divided between the national government and the individual states. Think of it like a multi-layered cake.
Oh, I like that analogy.
Right. Each layer with its own responsibilities.
So it's not just everything dictated from Washington, D.C.
Nope. The Founding Fathers were wary of centralized power. They wanted the states to have autonomy.
But that's going to lead to some tension, right? I mean, throughout history.
Oh, absolutely. That balance of power is a constant source of debate.
Makes sense. And then at the federal level, there's that whole system of checks and balances.
Right. So no single branch of government gets too powerful.
Yeah, remind me how that works again.
Okay, so you got the legislative branch, Congress, they make the laws. Then there's the executive branch, the president, they enforce the laws. And then you have the judicial branch. With the Supreme Court at the top, they interpret the laws.
And make sure everything's constitutional.
Exactly. It's a pretty ingenious system, actually.
It is, but the Constitution is over 200 years old. Does it still hold up today?
That's a question that people are always asking.
Right.
I mean, it's been amended 27 times.
Wow.
So clearly it's adapted.
Yeah.
But there's constant debate about its interpretation, how it applies to modern issues.
So it's a living document, basically.
Right, exactly. It's not just sitting on a shelf gathering dust.
That's cool. So, okay, let's talk about the two big elephants in the room, Democrats and Republicans.
Ah, yes. The two-party system.
They dominate everything, right? Like, is there even room for anyone else?
Well, technically, yes. Third parties do exist. They might not win major elections, but they can influence the conversation.
Yeah, they bring up issues the big parties might ignore.
Exactly. It's a way for those other voices to be heard.
Okay, so it's not totally a closed system.
Not completely. Now, we can't talk about the U.S. political system without talking about race and identity.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. It's been such a defining force throughout American history.
From slavery and segregation to the ongoing fight for racial justice. It's a complex and often painful legacy.
And it's not just black and white anymore.
Right. The U.S. has become so diverse. A growing Hispanic population, a vibrant Asian American community, indigenous peoples demanding recognition.
Yeah, it's a lot to navigate.
It is. The question is, how can the U.S. embrace this diversity, foster understanding and respect?
Big questions for sure. Okay, let's zoom out for a second. The U.S. as a global power, how has that shaped its relationships with other countries?
Another big question. Some people believe the U.S. has a duty to promote democracy and freedom around the world.
Yeah, that whole beacon of hope idea.
Yeah, right. But others are critical of that interventionist approach.
They point to the downsides, like unintended consequences.
Yeah. Or even accusations of U.S. imperialism.
So it's a mixed bag.
Definitely.
Yeah.
It's a reminder that wielding power on a global scale is complicated. You have to understand the nuances of different cultures, political systems.
So it's not about imposing American values on everyone else.
No, not at all. It's about finding ways to engage with the world constructively. Promote peace, stability, understanding.
Yeah. It's been an amazing journey, this deep dive into the United States.
It really has. So much to uncover, so much to discuss.
As we wrap up, what's the one thing you want listeners to remember about the U.S.?
I think it's this. The U.S. is not a finished product. It's an ongoing experiment, a nation constantly in dialogue with its past, present, and future.
It's not perfect, that's for sure.
No, definitely not. But it's a place where ideals clash with realities, where progress is a struggle.
It's a messy, complicated human story.
And that story is still being written.
That's a great point. And the exciting thing is, we all have a role to play in shaping that story.
We do, through our actions, our choices, our engagement with the world.
Well said. Okay, folks, that's a wrap on our deep dive into the United States. But I want to leave you with a thought. What will the next chapter of the American story look like? What role will the U.S. play in this century?
Those are questions worth pondering.
They are. Keep exploring, keep asking questions, and keep diving deep.
Until next time.